Okay, we got a tweet from, is this Jimbo Fisher? What do we got from Jimbo Fisher?
We got a tweet from Lane Kiffin.
Tweet from Lane Kiffin. Okay,
yes.
I see a Jimbo Fisher picture. You get me caught up to date here.
So Jimbo Fisher showed his annoying ego again, where he said, and I get sick of coaches saying this, he said, everybody runs the same plays. It's all about execution when asked about the play calling, which whenever you hear a coach say execution, that's code for I did my job. Don't blame me, blame the players. I don't want to accept any blame.
That's true.
And Lane Kiffin, to his credit, can I share the screen real quick?
Sure. If you know how to do it, that's above my technical IQ. By the way, go ahead and smash that like button while Caleb's trying to figure out how to share the screen. Look at him. Sharing screens like there's no tomorrow. He's confident. He's smiling, feeling good about himself.
This is the tweet.
Well, you got to bring the screen. You got to bring the screen up. Do I have to do that?
Oh wait.
I got it.
Oh wait, here we go. I got it. Okay, here we go. You see it?
I got it. I think I'm the one that did it, but it doesn't matter.
Yes. This everybody runs the same plays, ? It's only about the players executing, ? Facepalm at Kirby Smart. That sounds like he's taking a shot. That's a direct shot at Jimbo Fisher's quotes, right?
Yes. No, I don't think there's any question about it. And he references Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart doesn't run anything considerably difficult.
Right. Exactly. So I think I think Jimbo Fisher and Lane Kiffin have had a few wars of words. I think Lane Kiffin had some comments about NIL last year. And so we know Lane Kiffin ain't afraid to take shots. Here's the question. Was this fair or foul on Lane Kiffin? Should he be minding his own business, or is this him nearing the point that coaches should be held accountable? A good point to make.
Well, who am I? Am I the Ole Miss administration? Am I just Dave the commentator?
Dave the commentator.
Okay, Dave the commentator. This is golden. Way to go. I may text you. I might text him right now and say, great job. But now if I'm the administration, Ole Miss, I'm probably not crazy about it. And Lane looks like he's kicking a wounded animal because Jimbo Fisher's on his way out. I mean, you do have to factor that in there as well. But the tweet in and of itself, to me, or the quote from Jimbo Fisher that everybody runs the same plays, that sounds like the best word I can come up with is ignoramus.
Yeah, so I pulled up the article, the direct quote. So he was asked if Bobby Petrino's scheme upgrades could help Texas A&M this year. And he goes, it's not scheme, it's execution. And then he goes, everybody does the same thing. There's not a hill of beans between anybody as far as what goes on.
That is just wrong. And that's the sign of a coach that the game's passed him by. So feel better about that Texas A&M game.
Can you bet on who gets fired, on whether or not coaches get fired yet? Because I am so sure Jimbo Fisher is getting fired. Whatever the over-under is on wins this year, take the under with Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher is turning more and more into a disaster.
No, I agree. And he's aging like a dog, 7 years every year. Because he used to be innovative. Now he had James Winston, and that's why he won a national title. But if you want to talk about everybody runs the same plays, just take a second and watch what Georgia does and watch what Tennessee does. I mean, they're entirely different. Watch what Alabama will do this year and watch what they did last year and in previous years. That's just idiotic. I mean, it's absolutely idiotic to say that. And with Jimbo Fisher, he goes and hires a guy, Bobby Petrino, who was ahead of the curve 20 years ago before he couldn't take a curve on his Harley. And I mean, that's just not true. I mean, none of that's true. TCU, if they're running a pro style West Coast offense, whatever, they're not making the college football playoff. They're running stuff that's completely different. This to me almost sounds as stupid as Philip Fulmer hiring Dave Clawson, because Philip Fulmer didn't want to give up control. And he could have hired Will Muschamp, who was lighting it up as...
You mean Gus Malzahn?
Gus Malzahn, excuse me. Gus Malzahn, who was lighting it up as the offensive coordinator at Tulsa at the time, had the number one offense, but he went Dave Clawson instead. This hire is similar in a couple of different ways. I think that Jimbo Fisher knows that he can kind of control this offense because, let's face it, Bobby Petrino needs any break he can get at this stage in his career. And this is if I'm a Texas A&M fan, I'm completely disturbed by this. Can you imagine Josh Heupel says, "Well, everybody just pretty much runs the same place."
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I also think there's a second method to Lane Kiffin's madness on this, because you covered him in that 2009 year. As boisterous as he was, that you always thought there was a bit of a method to his madness, right? And that he had. And I think that Lane Kiffin is sending a signal to Texas A&M players, hey, if you lose, he's going to blame you. Why don't you come to me?
I think you would have to have those conversations with them. I don't know that I necessarily would read it from the tweet, but yes, maybe that's the beginning of it. And yeah, I mean, that's something we talked about with Rick Barnes. You really can't say that because you can pull a quote and then say it's out of context if you want to. But the bottom line is, when you criticize your players, that's going to be what resonates. Listen, Lane Kiffin and Josh Heupel are ahead of the curve. And I don't know what Lane Kiffin's going to do next. I don't know what Josh Heupel is going to do next, because they've both shown throughout their careers that when things aren't working, they will adjust. And Caleb, based off that quote, everybody runs the same plays, and based off the hire of Bobby Petrino, if you're a Texas A&M fan, you've got to be throwing your hands up in the air. Are we ever going to do, is what I would be asking myself as an Aggies fan, are we ever going to do something different?
Yeah, this is a middle finger by Jimbo Fisher to A&M, basically saying, I still
and
got
their fans. And their fans.
Yeah. And he's basically saying, I've got y'all. First off, with the hire of Petrino, Fisher's making it very clear at this point, I don't care what you guys do. I'm going to do things my way, and I'm going to walk out of here with $85 million if you don't let me do things my way. So I win no matter what, and I really don't care at this point. It's very, very clear that's how he feels. By the way, his whole career has been inflated by one national championship, which he should know this firsthand. That Florida State Auburn national title game, Gus Malzahn massively outcoached Jimbo Fisher. Funny enough, we were just bringing up Gus Malzahn. Fisher just had Jameis Winston, and there were a couple of mistakes made at the end that led to the national title. Florida State was lucky to win that game. If a couple of plays go differently, Fisher's out of Florida State and never gets another job, and Gus Malzahn's probably still at Auburn at this point.
Here's the other thing about Fisher, too. You would like to think that he could be open-minded and go hire a guy like Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's brother, who's going to coach the spread and going to have wide splits. And there are some similarities to what Josh Heupel does. You would like to think he would do that like Clemson did. But even if he did, and Garrett Riley would know this going in, he's going to overlord it. He's going to, everything you say, he's going to question it. He's not going to let you run your offense because he's an offensive coach. I think a lot of coaches knew that heading into the 2008 season after David Cutcliffe left, and Tennessee needed an offensive coordinator. I think that's why they settled on Dave Clawson. So Gus Malzahn may have very well turned it down because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to run his offense. So I think that one of two things: Jimbo Fisher either doesn't want to be innovative, so he didn't go out and hire an innovative guy like Garrett Riley, who I respect that hire by Dabo Swinney, who has been willing to turn his program over to coordinators. He either doesn't have that confidence to hand it over to somebody because he's an offensive coach, or a bunch of coaches in the college football community said, I'm not taking that because he's on his way out, and the best he could do was Bobby Petrino. He's day old bread. If we're having this conversation 20 years ago, Caleb, it's a different conversation.
Oh, I totally agree. I definitely think it's the latter. I think that, and you're right, this reminds me of, do you remember LSU basically all but fired Les Miles at the end of 2015, but then decided to bring him back for 2016? And Les Miles, in his most defiant move ever, because they were firing him because they were tired of the offense being so basic and bland and him focusing on defense. And what does he do? He goes and hires Cam Cameron as offensive coordinator, a hire straight out of 2000. And he did that to be completely defiant to the LSU administration because he felt he wasn't getting the respect he deserves. Look, he should have won 2 national titles, but he was lucky to win 1 at the same time, because that a 2-loss team getting in, and his selling point was, well, we never lost a game in regulation, and the voters bought that and voted him into the national title game.
Tim, Dewberry has become a content creator and maybe an associate producer on this show before long. Did you see his post on the message board? That is pure gold.
Fisher or Fulmer?
Who would you take, Fisher or Fulmer? It's the same career.
Okay, I'll say this. Fulmer wasn't openly defiant when he made hires and trying to give the middle finger to the university. I think Fulmer was behind the times and got a little desperate at certain points.
He was openly incompetent in the way he handled his personnel. Not only did he keep guys like Pat Washington and Larry Slade too long, but then, really, and David Cutcliffe fell in his lap.
He did find David Cutcliffe in the early 90s, though. I mean, that was a former hire from the 80s that he decided to just promote. I give him credit. And also, look, John Chavis was a coach for a time. And when Fulmer hired him, he was a coach for that time. And that was a real I don't know. Maybe that's just Fulmer promoting from within. And you're right. Maybe that's because after Cutcliffe, he hired Randy Sanders, who I think you and I both agree is not an offensive coordinator.
Well, you're talking to the guy who, before the 2005 season, sat down with him and his dad at a Cracker Barrel in I believe Athens, Tennessee, and wrote the story about how he would probably be the next head coach of the Vols. So you're probably talking to the wrong guy. He looked like the fair-haired young coach who would take over for Philip Fulmer. Yeah, but Tim's throwing heat. If you had to take Philip Fulmer and knowing what we know to head your program, Calhoun University.
Fulmer, I would go.
Wait, let me set it up.
Today's tough.
This is a good one.
It's a great one.
The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
Brought to you by Craven Wings. Best wings in town. It ain't close. I'm going there today. I'm fired up. Jacob Warren says they're great. I'm going to try Sauce 87. I was going to go a totally different direction. And you can fill out that as well. It's on our Twitter account. But that was going to be with Hendon Hooker flying up the draft charts. What player did you most root for after his Tennessee career? So give me some of those too, if you don't care. Because every time you get ahead of today's tough question, like the night before, which I did, then something better comes up the next day. You're better off just flying by the seat of your pants sometimes. So Fulmer or Fisher? Calhoun University opens tomorrow. You can take either in their prime.
This is like remember how so many people felt about the 2016 election when they're like, we got to vote for one of these candidates? I don't like to get political, but it's like, that's how I feel with Fulmer and Fisher. Fulmer or...
Okay, let me give you a thumbnail sketch. And I covered Philip, so I know him way better than Jimbo. I have coaches who had a special season. It was because of Tennessee's defense and Al Wilson that Tennessee won a national championship. Jimbo Fisher is because Jameis Winston. And
Jeremy Pruitt running the defense.
When he wasn't having girlfriends. But so he had a full plate. All right, so
was asparagus on that plate? Because he wouldn't have known what that is.
Some backstory to that I'll get to at some point. So, man, you're in the state of Florida. Okay, and thumbnail sketch. Let me finish this before I get sidetracked in my brain. Thumbnail sketch. Both, I think, lack discipline throughout their careers. I mean, a lot of people forget that Philip Fulmer in today's day and age would have been fired for what he did. He met with a young lady who alleged sexual assault against a player, and he met with her along with his attorney at a Shoney's the next day. That would have been tampering with a witness. You would have been fired. Boom, on the spot.
I mean, in some states, you would be arrested for that.
Yes. So, and I thought that clearly Jimbo Fisher looked the other way when he knew more stuff about Jameis Winston. I will take, if I had to start my university tomorrow, I will take Philip Fulmer because of one reason, and that is a considerably better recruiter than Jimbo Fisher. I think Jimbo Fisher has recruited well at A&M. I thought he recruited well at Florida State before he let things go off the rails. He didn't care about Florida State. They didn't have an offensive lineman that could play when he left. So I will take Fulmer. Recruiting at a place like Tennessee is more difficult than Florida State or Texas A&M. So I would take Fulmer to start Calhoun University tomorrow. But man, you could talk me out of it.
I'm going to go the other way, and here's why I'm going to go the other way. I think it's known at this point. I talked about it a few weeks ago. You have the book Orange Crush. I read it in that book, funny enough. But it's known that there are two different Philip Fulmers that coach Tennessee. The Fulmer of the 90s up until about 99 was a very hands-on coach. Very, very hands-on with the players, very involved. And the Fulmer that I think when you started covering with Knox News was I want to be a CEO and just almost Joe Berturner. I don't really want to work too hard. I just want to go meet with the boosters and things and let the staff do their job. And that's that Fulmer. I would take Jimbo Fisher over, because at least Jimbo Fisher seems like he wants to be involved with the team. Whereas Fulmer, the second half of his career, a guy who just wants to sit around and be a CEO, that never works with coaching. Yes, Dabo was a CEO, but Dabo is hands-on as a CEO. He's always thinking of ways to get an edge.
Well, I guarantee he's dogging it in recruiting like Philip did.
Yes, exactly.
Still to this day, I think that people don't understand how important recruiting was and why Philip Fulmer was such a perfect fit for Tennessee. Philip would sometimes leave when Vanderbilt and Kentucky were terrible. He would leave during practice and go make recruiting phone calls. I mean, that was not unusual, and it sounds crazy, but it was actually very smart. It was because he knew that they were going to show up and beat Kentucky and Vanderbilt. In those days, they had a 22-game winning streak against each of them. You knew you were going to win.
Yeah, the only time either was a threat was, by the way, you saying that explains why in the mid-90s Tennessee always struggled with Vanderbilt on that side.
They did. And their players didn't want to be there. I mean, for goodness sake, I didn't want to be at practice because it was freezing cold and they were playing at Vanderbilt, Kentucky. Travis says Fulmer put incredible players, incredible into the league. Jimbo has James Winston.
Well, that's the thing. Fulmer's staff developed players. I never took that away. I mean, you were going to be developed, unless you were a defensive back, as you talked about. Unless you played in the secondary, you were going to be developed for the NFL if you went to Tennessee. And I think I give him that.
I just know more good and bad about Philip, so it's probably hard for me to compare the two, honestly and frankly, because I could throw up bad things about Philip that would make me want to say Jimbo, and I could throw up good things that would make me want to say Philip. So
there's one thing that's going to make me say Jimbo, and it's this. Me covering Tennessee in 2006. I don't think Jimbo would ever say this. When Tennessee had the worst run blocking in the SEC that year, they couldn't buy 3 yards when they ran it. Remember that? The 06 team. Mm-hmm. And Fulmer in November says, I'm going to start working with some of the offensive linemen to help them get a little better. And in my mind, I'm like, you're a former offensive lineman and a head coach. And
I know we don't have the SEC, but I hate cursing on the air, and I almost slipped. Why? Why were you already working with the offensive line?
Yeah. Why wasn't he already doing it?
What were you doing previously?
Exactly. I think Jimbo would never say that about a quarterback. He would never be like, my quarterback's struggling right now, so I'm going to spend some time working with my quarterback. Could you imagine if Jimbo Fisher said that?
Tim says, let me see if I can get a buyout from Basilio and come to work for you guys. I didn't know you were working for Basilio, but I'll tell you what, the key in media nowadays is have a bunch of different paychecks. You got to be hustling. You got to keep them coming in, or you get frustrated by being underpaid in the media. So work for us both and tell Tony I said hello. Great guy.
Or be Jimbo Fisher and get an $85 million contract and not care if you win. And so
Gene says Dave has too much inside knowledge about the skeletons in Fulmer's closet to be objective. You're right. I'm going to let you pick for Calhoun University, and I'm going
to go Jimbo because I think Jimbo is more hands-on. That's where I'm going to go with that. And I think that's a negative, his hands-on, because he's defiant. But I just think Fulmer was as hard as people say he worked in recruiting, and I believe you. I mean, that you know some good about Fulmer too that a lot of people don't know.
I do. That's why I could talk myself either way.
Yeah, but I will say I know for a. I don't want to say I know for a fact because I can't say that, but I know based on a lot of circumstantial evidence that Fulmer got pretty lazy the last few years at Tennessee, and he was kind of lazy as an athletic director too.
Yeah, it's a grind. I don't see how these guys do it long-term in recruiting. I feel a real sense of empathy for them. I mean, you're still making $2-3 million even back then. So not too much empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. But Gene, you're right. But I know so much good about Fulmer too. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two coaches.